Moving on to session 5. Most capital market conversations focus on the moment of the transaction, the listing, the raise, the exit. Session 5 is about everything that happens before that moment, and how the decisions you make now will shape options later on. We have 4 panelists who are navigating from very different vantage points, founders, operators, and capital allocators. The conversation will cover venture and institutional capital, strategic partnerships, and the regulatory and ownership considerations that are distinctive to this sector. Moderating is our colleague Dominique, a partner in our Montreal office with more than over 25 years of experience in M&A, corporate, commercial law, and international trade and public procurement. Dominique advises clients in some of the most highly regulated and sensitive sectors in our economy. Dominique, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. So as Manveer mentioned, I'm Dominique Babin, partner at Dentons. So we've been talking about innovation and startup and good ideas. And now we have the pleasure of being with 4 representatives of the emerging Canadian tech defense company. So we'll talk about innovation and the great ideas that are coming up, and also the challenges and their objectives that they're looking for. So here with us, so we have Katheron Intson, who's the co-founder and CEO of Sentinel R&D. Welcome, Katheron. We have Mitch Carkner, who's the COO and board of director of Dominion Dynamics. So welcome, Mitch. We have Gabriel Sirois, who's the CFO of H2 Analytics. Welcome. And we have Michael Langlais, Vice President, Risk Development of Commissionaires, Great Lakes. Welcome. So to start with, I would like each of you to maybe explain your project, what you do, how you do it, and especially why you do it. Because, this is your chance to speak to the investors, potential partners, and potential clients that are here in the room. So maybe I'll start with Katheron.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have had my introduction preempted on the last panel. Thank you, Mike. We are a manufacturing company masquerading as a drone company. So our specialty is in the manufacturing of composite aerostructures. So basically the airframes of things like interceptors, drones, and even missiles. And so it's really the technology underlying our production that is our special sauce. And the whole reason we started this company is simply because the West is seriously outgunned in this particular area of manufacturing. Our allies produce 75 to 100 times more airframes than we do. They have figured out how to do this, and we are lagging behind, and we would not win a conflict if we found ourselves in one today.
Thank you. So going on maybe with Mitch?
Yeah, thank you. So we've been building Dominion Dynamics for the last year. We're a venture-backed, as the defense tech bros like to say, neo-prime. We're building a sovereign Canadian prime integrator. Canada truly hasn't had a prime integrator. For those that aren't defense world savvy, a prime integrator is an organization that delivers a system of a system to the actual military. It's not down the supply chain. You're doing integration and you're also building product. We have been building product off of our balance sheet. We've raised roughly $30 million, a little bit of a counterfactual to some of the negative tones in here on venture in Canada. We have been successful raising from Georgian, Bessemer, the BC Pension Fund, and some others. There is a way if you have the right strategy. We've built roughly 10 products, hardware and software. We've deployed 5 times with the Canadian Forces without contracts, ruffled a few feathers, but that is our model. The entire intention is to compress the development timeline. We're not selling on PowerPoint. We're not going to win a 10-year contract and deliver something 7 years. We're building it immediately, getting it to the Arctic, and compressing those development timelines. I mentioned the Arctic. spent most of this past year in the north. We're focusing on the Arctic first. It is the hardest domain that the CAF has to operate in, but ultimately we will build capabilities for every domain that the Canadian warfighter operates within. And we're building a Canadian company with Canadian values, but ultimately we will be selling capabilities to NATO. I think Pete or Mike were talking about how important that is. This is about winning the home field, but then serving our NATO allies to ensure that what we learn in the north and on our coasts gets applied to the Western allies.
And interestingly, you didn't start as a commercial company and then pivoted into the defense industry. You started directly into the defense industry. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've got some swag that says single use, one way. We're unapologetically single use. And that's a bit of a controversial statement in Canada, but the fact is, at an engineering and a product level, in the early days of a company, if you focus on two different customer sets, two different problem sets, you are not going to be world class. So we are focused on the CAF, we're focused on the Canadian Forces, solving their problems. And if 5-10 years down the road, we will be a multi-decade company, we have some IP or some thoughts that can support the commercial part of our country, absolutely, we'll probably sell the IP to someone else and continue to be single-use one way.
But this could be seen as a risk or as a risky approach. So what was the key to your success in this case, or what gives you confidence that this is the right approach and that you don't need to diversify right from the outset?
Well, I think I missed one of my 5 W's there on the why. But basically 45% of our company is veterans or has family in the CAF. This is very focused on ensuring that our military, which has basically been hollowed out since the end of the Cold War, actually has the capabilities. So that is the focus. And if our product focus, single use, becomes a challenge, then obviously we'll consider that, but I think it's actually an advantage.
And your mission, your vision is very clear, and it's probably easier to communicate it with your investors when you have such a clear mission.
Absolutely.
And a consistent message. Gabriel, why don't you tell us about your project, your objectives, and the reasons why you have these projects?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the CFO of a company called H2 Analytics, and we are a software company operating in the training and simulation space, and it is very comforting to share the stage with other people who are defense first and unapologetic about it. We have a similar, I guess, kind of background in the business. So we are 60% people who come from the military, either from a soft background or within the intelligence community. And really, the mission is simple. The mission is really to make sure that we can train our people for the next war. And the reason why that is so important, just to throw some stats in terms of like our production capabilities. I remember when I used to cover Baghdad when I was in uniform, and there would be roughly about 400 IEDs annually. So just last summer, one salvo from the Russians into Ukraine had over 750 drones and munitions striking that area. So the problem that we're
1,500 last night.
Well, there you go. Right? So really the problem that we're trying to attack is a problem of scale. And we need to do that by providing data and stress testing those institutions to make sure that they can function there. I think the other thing I'd be happy to report is that, beyond kind of the pride of the mission and being defense first, is we can do it profitably. So we are a bit of an anomaly in the ecosystem where we've taken $0 of outside capital and managed to do this profitably. Now, while I would argue that the government is slow at getting the dollars out, there's clearly appetite to do so. And in the last 5 months, I've closed contracts that would be, 3 times the size of our total lifetime revenue. So there's clearly money coming into the system. It's coming too slowly, but there is a change in tone from the government.
And how were you able to avoid the regular procurement process?
I mean, we don't avoid it. We bash our head against it every day, and we get through it. But jokes aside, though, I think really the go-to-market motion that we found has been successful is really by starting small with the customer and getting a foot in the door. And we started off as a service company, and we built our software to solve a problem. And so that entry point where we're solving a problem and co-creating it with the end user has been a real game changer for us. It's allowed us to really build our products specifically to the problem sets that we already understood and knew, but then continue to evolve it and refine it to meet the needs that they need operationally.
So you developed your product specifically and your service offering specifically for the Canadian government, right?
So for military or intelligence organizations. So
Okay.
there's a broader market here than just Canada. And I know that everybody's excited about the dollars that we're talking about here, and I applaud the government for doing it. But we're talking about maybe getting to $80 billion annually. The US is talking about going to 1.5 trillion, right? And so this is just our market where we will demonstrate the use case, but the real market for growth is going to be outside of Canada. And the thing that would make me proudest, and really our mission, I didn't state Canada, is really to make sure that we are solving that problem for all our allied forces. The geopolitics that we're facing don't just affect Canada, and we need to be able to provide a product and market that solves the problems of those forces as well.
Thank you. Michael, so you have a different business model, but as interesting, so why don't you tell us about Commissionaire, the Canadian Corps of Commissionaires and the Resilience Fund?
Thanks, Dominique. This is the first time in the 100-year history of my organization that we have ever been introduced as a tech company, which is wild.
I said innovative company.
Thank you. And I represent Resilience, which is our national vehicle to build and operate training, security, and defense-adjacent infrastructure in Canada. Whereas Gabe, H2 Analytics are preparing the military for war, our mission is to prepare Canadian society for war. So to take that total defense concept that we have seen in Nordic countries, in the Baltic countries, and to apply it in Canada, and to see how that applies at every single level of society, not just in the military, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector, in our communities, and in our homes. Because Commissionaires have 20,000 people in 1,200 communities across the country. It is the single largest employer of veterans in Canada, including the federal government. We have this vast pool of talent which is incredibly precious, and for years we have struggled to connect them with the opportunities that they should be pursuing, which is notably countering these emergent threats which are clear, present, and now. The globe is experiencing a higher level of conflict than at any time since the Second World War. And procuring a pistol in 1944 and using it for 80 years is not the procurement model that is going to win the present war. And we're not the first panel to use the term war. Our colleagues who used to work at Nortel used it and said that we've been at war for a long time. So this has real economic ramifications for the country that I think we're now just becoming sensitized to. And these are the problem sets that we're trying to address on behalf of society as a whole, not just for the military.
So you see defense like in the broader sense of national security, and it can also involve like internal threat or security in general. So that's also the focus of what you do.
Absolutely. Building that private sector capacity, the capacity at the level of municipal governments for public-private partnerships, anything from critical infrastructure and power generation to key transportation corridors, isolated communities in the Arctic, particularly those with an Inuit, Métis, or First Nations nexus. All of these are vulnerable communities. And right now, if you as a member of industry, ask yourself the question, like, I just had a drone fly over my very sensitive defense production site. What do I do about that? Chances are you're going to Google it, and that's not good enough. And I know this is the case because I have spoken with several senior members of industry who have been in that exact same situation. This is the problem that we're trying to solve, and the only way that we're going to be able to do it is by commercializing, by using the products of great Canadian companies like Sentinel R&D, like H2 Analytics, like Dominion Dynamics, particularly in the Arctic, and be able to more broadly commercialize them and put them in the hands of the people that matter the most from a domestic perspective, which is the people that provide our defense industrial capability.
And the Commissionaires have a long history in Canada, and it started as, well, it's still a not-for-profit organization, right? But it doesn't mean that there's no money involved in what you do, and so you actually have real revenues from your security operations, correct?
Sure, yeah, we're an ongoing business. It's a not-for-profit. It exists to hire veterans and to secure Canada. And that's the fun thing. I play on the for-profit side, so Resilience is this new vehicle that we use to do this. And I get to have very mind-bending conversations with potential investors because I say, we're only interested in the capabilities. We're interested in fielding them, in making sure that they're out there, that they're being used, and that they're consistent across the country. And you get to take the profit, and that often blows people's minds. But that's a very uniquely Canadian model. And in fact, it's a uniquely Canadian strength because that concept of looking to the group first, of looking to our common good, is what animates a lot of our businesses. It's certainly what animates Mitch and Elliot over at Dominion Dynamics. It's what really infuses a lot of these veteran-owned and veteran-employing small businesses that are operating in this space. And if we looked at that as a strength, instead as a strange oddity, then all of a sudden the entry points for everyone from VC all the way up to institutional and how to participate in this space, I think start to make a lot more sense.
Well, that's certainly a very unique business model, and we'll see how this can be put to use to maybe bridge some of the gaps in the financing or capital fields. So. Moving to capital, so we spoke about initial public offering. We know that, well, this is one of the topics of the discussions today, but IPO is not the only avenue, and capital can take several forms. So why don't you, each of you, tell us how you see capital needs in the future, how you want to or you intend to meet these needs, and what challenges you have or expect to have to reach your goals. So why don't we start with Katheron again, please?
Okay. Well, I would say, the biggest challenge that we faced over the lifetime of the company, and we have been operational really for 15 months, is really in staying Canadian. That is the biggest risk to our business, is staying Canadian. And I'm very proud of Elliot and Mitch for their, prowess in being able to raise Canadian capital. But the truth is that the Americans have read the tea leaves on Canadian defense long before the Canadian investor landscape did. Specifically for us, because we do go to Ukraine and we have drones that go into combat, I find that the appetite to invest in this sector, specifically in things that go boom, is still absolutely not there. I've had a number of funds invite me cordially to come and speak at their events, and then at the end, they'll tell me that they're not making any changes to underwriting things that actually have offensive capabilities. And as we start to work with Canada's D&D and we start to execute on those contracts, you might think that this would mean that Americans see the company as being more Canadian, but instead they take a look at our deal pipeline and they go, wow, you would 10x that deal pipeline if you were American, and we're totally willing to make you an American company in order for us to bring that capability to America. So that's the biggest challenge that I see for my company in the short term, and also around kind of Canadian public perception, because some of you may say, okay, well, we could just IPO, but then we have to deal with the Canadian public perception around making things that go boom. So I would say that the challenge for us will be, finding investors who are willing to underwrite the kind of capability that we want to develop.
And why are the investors reluctant in investing in a defense-related company? Or do you see specific concerns that are recurrent from potential investors?
Oh, it all comes down to kind of governance and governance and social good. We, love the idea of building capabilities that allow us to watch whether we're being invaded, but in terms of what we would actually action if we did get invaded, then things start to get a little more tricky for investors.
So is it a question of perception, reputation, compliance?
I assume it's perception because, having a business model of one-way systems that then blow up and your customers buy a lot more, that sounds like a pretty, successful business model to me. So it all comes down to, the perception.
Could I jump in for a second?
Of course.
Here's my observation and my fear is that there's a lot of people kicking tires saying they want to buy a car, and I don't know if they want to. And I say that not because they don't have the capital, not because they're not good investors and they don't know what they're doing, but they do not understand the space. So like even if we did do this, 20 years ago, there's clearly muscular atrophy, right? And so I'd say my observation as I go and talk to people is that they have a great understanding of how to scale businesses, but they are deeply afraid of what the consequences are of investing into a business with long sales cycles. And I think it's really just attributed to them not understanding and that fear of the unknown. And so they are afraid to get their feet wet.
And maybe they need a framework to analyze the investment, understand the risk, and maybe like they're reluctant to investing in a company that has like 15 months of existence, or I don't know what can be good.
Doesn't matter if you have contracts, though, right?
I know. But in terms of risk, the perception may be different. But I understand it's probably a challenge. Yes,
I was just going to add a quick anecdote and maybe an optimistic viewpoint. About a year and a half ago, when we were initially raising capital, talking to the Maple 8, which is frankly the source of capital if you're going to remain private long-term as a defense company. We, talking to these institutions, had some good initial conversations. Then you receive a questionnaire. And I'm not going to point at any institution in particular. Hundreds of questions. Will you create energetics? And I just heard a great investor at 19, Mike Smith, talk about that's the opportunity for Canada. If you checked yes, you were off the list. And there was hundreds and hundreds of questions that were a mix of ESG, a mix of not really understanding the defense space. And it was just very difficult for us to even understand why we would want these people to be part of our company. The positive side is we've gone back to those tables 9-10 months later, and the questionnaires are very different. They're 10% of what they were, and these people are starting to understand the ecosystem. So I think that's very positive. I think the trend will continue that direction. But what we truly need is we need a consistent government signal for the next 10 years. We cannot have waffling on the defense industrial strategy. We need to see execution. We cannot see government change in 2 or 3 years and all of a sudden this strategy is forgotten about. That will be so impactful to the venture community and companies like all of us on this stage. We will not recover. So we need the consistent signal. People are putting capital into the ground. Kath's company is going to invest in assets that have 5 to 10 year depreciation. That doesn't just, come. It's not a SaaS company. So we need the consistent signal, and we'll continue to see the Maple 8 and big institutions start to understand the ecosystem. I know I kind of rambled on there, but I thought it was an optimistic view of things that I've seen. Yeah.
And actually, what was your success, or like the key to the success of Dominion Dynamics for raising capital early on?
How long do we have? It was about education. I think there's a lot of through lines, but it was starting to educate very, very, very early investors that are on our cap table who are incredible investors about what defense is. It's not CAC and LTV. It's not revenue run rate on a quarterly basis. It's shaping requirements, owning the mind and mind of the operators, having conviction about what your product needs to be and going and building that and not waiting for PowerPoint, and really educating them on that, and we brought them along the journey.
And fantastic founder market fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So actually on that, I think one thing that the community should probably do is actually leverage the entrepreneur community more, right? And so like the reality is that if the investors don't have the expertise in there, they should be leaning into the companies that do, right? So, and totally talking my own book here, but like if you've been selling to the government for a decade, you figured out how to do it profitably, like we clearly understand that piece of it. So like what am I looking for a partner? I'm actually looking for somebody who's going to shore up those other gaps, right? Which is maybe how do I do this in a new market? How do I do M&A so that I can actually do a buy and build and start to consolidate, or and we have growing pains. We've got to double the size of our business in 12 months. Like those are hard challenges that investors in the SaaS space and other markets have clearly lived through before. So I think they should leverage us as entrepreneurs the same way that we leverage them as capital providers.
And actually, Gabriel, you've worked for EDC, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or
that is correct. So there was a lot of hate on for the VCs earlier. So I like to categorize myself now as a reformed venture capitalist. But yeah, so I was a partner with EDC's venture capital and private equity practice before moving over to H2 Analytics.
So it's interesting. You see both sides of the equation. So what do companies or don't know what investors are looking for that they should know, and what should investors know about the companies they invest in?
Yeah, so ironically, I find that we get those questionnaires too. They're 100 questions long, and everybody's asking about ITAR. Do you have something that goes boom? But then I find that they also just sink right back into their typical kind of MO, right? And so the one that I would say that gets to me more often than not, now that I've been behind the curtain on the defense industrial side, is really diversification. And everybody's looking for it, and everybody's looking for comfort. Here's the reality of it. If you're looking for that, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics are already public companies. You can get diversification in public defense if you go there. If what you're looking for is high growth, attacking a new vertical, you're not going to get that with a company which is a mid-market business, which is subscale. It's just not realistic to have multiple product lines across multiple programs of record. That's really hard to do. But I think the more important point is actually that in the early journey of a business, if you're growing your revenue and you're concentrating, that means that you're winning. So what does a government do when they do things? Nobody wants to put an operational system where if it does not work, it is body bags coming back on a plane. So what do? Is that they test it. They buy it in small batches. And if it works, they double down and they increase their expenditure. And so what we've noticed in our go-to-market strategy is as we've been deploying our software and the capabilities being proven out, we're now getting more revenue from the HQ level of that organization. And so my revenue is actually concentrating to my customer base, but they're doing that because what we are selling is something that they want.
Interesting. And where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I mean, selling
Company.
selling to the rest of NATO. Right? That's the goal. The goal is to have a product with a maple leaf on it, which actually adds value to the rest of our partners.
And what do you see your capital would look like?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And we are in a fortunate position being profitable that I'm not at an existential risk to take any capital, so we can afford to be a bit more selective. We're just looking for partners. And so what I'm really looking for in terms of a capital provider is somebody who's either going to provide some expertise or add an extension to my balance sheet. And so I do not want to change the DNA of the business where we're going to move into a cash burning position. And that is me prior being a banker and worried about the banks coming in to pull the rug out from under me because the procurement cycle is taking longer than it necessarily has to. But somebody who's going to be willing to play the game with us for a long time and actually build out that expansion. And some of that might be through doing acquisitions. It could be investing into new product verticals, but we need somebody who's going to be in for the long haul.
That's going to be interesting to follow. So Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Resilience Fund and actually what you're looking for and how your model has been evolving recently?
So when the military is the only monolithic buyer, we find a lot of failure in early stage VC companies that just can't get that runway to sell. And part of what we believe we have to build in Canada is we have to build buyers. As an organization that acts as this liminal layer between multiple levels of society and different segments and sectors, we found that the ability to be able to field capabilities on people's behalf and deliver that as a service spares them a lot of heartache. And the ability to do that on behalf of the government and on behalf of the military means that they can get through that testing cycle and that proving cycle much quicker, right? So you reduce that from years to hopefully months, if possible. That is a really important role, and it's one that shouldn't be discounted, and it's one that the big primes, we've been speaking about Lockheed and Boeing, cannot and will not do exclusively on behalf of Canada at the level that we're looking at domestically. There is clearly a gap here. How do we get these things that already exist in Canada, this incredible talent, these incredible capabilities and products, into the hands of the people who need it the most, the end users, who are, in this context, soldiers, is a terrible, terrible process in Canada, and it doesn't have to be. Because we can build the buyers that can do that for them and just get them to the places where they can play with these new capabilities and select the ones that are the best for them. So in a nutshell, that's a big part about what resilience is for, because we're already there. We're on every single Canadian Forces space. We worry equally, if not more, about counter-UAS solutions and how we're going to deal with this in urban environments. These are all very topical problems for us, and the solutions exist. And we can field these capabilities and build them, acquire them, and scale them nationally in a way that a small specialized provider would really struggle to do, because they should do what they do best, which is build, 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 build. We can build, scale, operate, and buy.
Thank you. So just to wrap this up, maybe I'll let each of you, you each have very different stories, different objectives, very different journeys. You have a great audience here. If you had one message for the audience, something to ask or something to offer, what would it be? I'll start with Mitch.
Something to ask or something to offer?
Yeah.
Checks?
No, I two ShamWows.
It can be, you can offer a piece of advice.
No, I think maybe on the political or the public perception of defense, and my comment earlier around the signal needs to be consistent for 10 years. My view, and this is just me offering this, is that Canada needs to be an incredibly prickly porcupine for the next 10 or 15 years to create peace in our country. And we need great companies like Cass and others in this room that have the ability to manufacture capabilities so that on the 4th day of the conflict, we're not begging the Americans or the rest of the NATO alliance for energetics, ammunition, and drones. That's critical. So that's just my quick offer. Yeah.
Thank you. Gabriel?
I think mine's going to be an observation on the market. I used to work for a Crown, and so the thing we always used to say is that we don't want to be in the business of picking winners. I think what I've been noticing is a real sea change with the government right now, which is that they are starting to pick their winners, and they're starting to pick them early. And I'd say the money's starting to flow, but the big dollars haven't, right? So let's be honest, like the first dollars that came out was a bit of the creative accounting, the low-lying fruit, but the next wave is going to be on the actual capabilities, right? The actual CapEx, the things that the soldiers actually need, not just their paychecks. And so what I would say is that I think the opportunity to get in ahead of it is now, because that next wave of money coming out is the one that's going to hit the companies. And so, if I had to go back to my investor lens, yes, I have to understand the DIS and understand what those key sovereign capabilities are, but I think if you want to make an outsized return, the opportunity to get capital sunk in the ground is probably the next 12 to 24 months.
Thank you. Katheron?
Some of you may have heard me say this before, but something that I think Canadian investors miss is that the history of venture capital actually began in defense. So it was the 1940s. It was a guy named George DeRoit. He was a professor at the business school in Harvard, and he started the first, I think it was either $3 or $5 million fund focused on investing in companies with technologies that had been used during World War II. And out of that fund came a number of category winners, and it's how the VC model was proven out. So here we are, nearly a century later, Canada having missed that whole first few decades of that type of investment, having probably got caught up in the dot-com bubble and now the ChatGPT-4 wrapper type stuff. But this is how this model began, and we're going to see a new category of winners emerge from this new era of deglobalization and conflict. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I wanted to do was actually refute something that Pete said earlier. For the investors in the room, he said, hey, just wait for us to lead, and then you can follow on. And again, I would go back to my observation that other investors seem better at reading the tea leaves than Canadians. If you email me and slow play me and wait for 19 or BDC to invest, and then come and offer me a check, I will tell you to go away. And I will tell you you're a wuss. So develop your own conviction and develop it early.
Well, thank you. And Michael, last but not least.
The reason we're having this conversation now is because the need is now. And this isn't just a numbers game, it is a case of necessity. Having spent the better part of the past 15 years working in fragile contexts internationally at a country level, watching the rules-based international order slowly fall apart, watching the pace of global conflict accelerate and multiply in ways that were increasingly unexpected, I can say that these conflicts are quickly becoming more complex than we're able to deal with, and they are coming to our doorstep, and they are affecting people in ways that just exceed the price of gas at the gas pump. Investing in these capabilities under the current circumstances is not just a case of patriotic duty, nor is it a case of achieving the best possible returns. It is ensuring that you have access to the capabilities that you will require to adapt to the current reality of international markets and how business is done in Canada over the next 20 years. And the stark reality is that we are behind the curve, and it is really up to you as people involved in capital markets to get us back to where we need to be. And you play an instrumental role in that, not just the government, but equally in the private sector, private capital markets, and of course, the TSX and the road towards being able to have people list on public markets.
Thank you. So the world is changing. There's clearly a need to build like a strong Canadian defense capability. And there are companies that have good ideas, good solutions, good products to support that vision. So I guess the idea now is to work together and keep the dialogue going on. So thank you very much.